My boss's daughter had been exploiting my loyalty to steal nearly $500,000 from the company, and when I finally confronted her with the evidence, she smiled coldly and said, "Who do you think my father will believe? His precious daughter, or just another employee?" What she didn't know was that I'd already discovered her secret, and her arrogance was about to cost her everything. My name is David Miller, and after 12 years as operations director at Hartwell Industries, I thought I knew every trick in the corporate playbook until the boss's daughter came home from business school. Rebecca Hartwell stepped off the elevator that first Monday morning like she owned the place, which technically she would someday, but her smile held something that made my stomach twist with unease. Richard Hartwell had built this manufacturing company from a single garage into a $50 million empire, and I'd been his right hand through every major decision. When he called me into his corner office that morning, his weathered face showed both pride and worry as he gestured toward his daughter. "David, I need you to teach Rebecca everything," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a father's hope. "She's got the MBA, but you've got the real experience. Show her how we actually run this place." Rebecca extended her hand with practiced confidence, her grip firm and her eyes meeting mine directly. "I've heard incredible things about you, David. Dad says you're the one who keeps everything running smoothly while he handles the big picture." The first month felt like a dream mentorship. She asked thoughtful questions during our factory floor tours, stayed late to understand our custom steel fabrication processes, and even brought coffee for the night shift workers. When she suggested small improvements to our scheduling system, I found myself genuinely impressed by her fresh perspective. But small things started bothering me. The way she'd take notes during our conversations about employee concerns, then never follow up on them. How she'd step away whenever I approached during her frequent phone calls. The questions she asked about our financial systems seemed oddly specific, focusing on authorization processes rather than business strategy. 3 weeks into her training, I forgot my jacket in the conference room and returned to grab it. Rebecca stood with her back to the door, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones that carried just enough for me to catch fragments. "The old man suspects nothing," she was saying, her voice completely different from the respectful tone she used with me. "Miller's completely loyal to Dad. He'll never see what's coming." My blood turned cold as I stood frozen in the doorway. This wasn't the eager student I'd been mentoring. This was someone else entirely, someone who'd been playing a role so convincing that I'd never questioned her motives. I backed away quietly, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. That evening, I sat in my home office staring at financial reports, searching for patterns I might have missed. Everything looked normal on the surface, but Rebecca's words echoed in my head. What exactly was I not supposed to see coming? And why did I suddenly feel like I'd been walking into a trap that had been months in the making? 2 weeks later, Rebecca appeared in my office doorway with tears streaming down her face, her usual composure completely shattered. Her hand shook as she clutched a folder against her chest, and for a moment, I almost forgot the phone conversation I'd overheard. "David, I need your help desperately," she said, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine panic. "I've made a terrible mistake with the Henderson manufacturing contract, and if Dad finds out, it will destroy our relationship forever." She explained through sobs that she'd accidentally promised Henderson a 15% discount on their quarterly order without getting proper authorization. The mistake would cost us nearly $200,000 in profit margins, money that would come directly out of our operating budget. "I know I have no right to ask this," she continued, sinking into the chair across from my desk. "But could you approve the discount through your operations authority? I'll find a way to make up the difference over the next quarter. You're the only person I trust enough to help me." Every instinct screamed warnings, but her desperation seemed so real. I'd watched Richard struggle with their relationship for years, seen his disappointment when she chose art history over business initially, witnessed his joy when she finally came home to join the company. The thought of being responsible for damaging that bond made my chest tighten. Against my better judgment, I approved the discount, restructuring 3 other contracts to absorb the financial hit. It meant longer hours for me, tighter margins for the company, and stress I hadn't felt since my wife passed away 3 years earlier. But Rebecca's grateful hug and tearful promises that this would never happen again convinced me I was doing the right thing. The next month brought another crisis. A supplier payment had been accidentally delayed, creating a cash flow problem that needed immediate resolution. Rebecca stood in my office again. Same tears, same desperate pleas, same promises that this was absolutely the last time she'd need my help. Then came overtime approvals for a project that somehow went over budget. Emergency equipment repairs that couldn't wait for proper procurement procedures. Each request followed the same pattern. Rebecca's tearful vulnerability, appeals to my loyalty to her father, and my growing sense that I was drowning in problems that weren't supposed to be mine to solve. But late one Friday evening, as I reviewed quarterly reports in my empty office, I noticed something that made my hands shake. The Henderson contract showed a 5% discount, not the 15% Rebecca had claimed. She'd lied about the scope of her mistake and somehow pocketed the 10% difference. I pulled out every transaction she'd asked me to cover over the past 4 months, cross-referencing them with actual contracts and bank records. What I discovered made me physically sick. Rebecca hadn't been making innocent mistakes. She'd been systematically stealing from the company, using my reputation and my relationship with her father as cover for nearly $400,000 in theft. The eager student, the grateful daughter, the vulnerable young woman who needed my help. It had all been an elaborate performance designed to turn my loyalty into her weapon. Monday morning arrived with Rebecca sitting calmly at the conference table when I walked in. No tears this time, just a cold smile that told me she knew exactly why I'd asked for this meeting. The evidence folder in my hands felt heavier than it should have as I laid out bank statements, forged approvals, and altered contracts across the polished wood surface. "I trusted you," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Your father trusted you, and this is how you repay that trust." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying the documents with the detached interest of someone reviewing a restaurant menu. The vulnerable daughter act had vanished completely, replaced by someone I'd never met before. "You're going to keep your mouth shut about this, David," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Because if you don't, I'll tell my father that you've been stealing money from operations for months. Who do you think he'll believe? His daughter or just another employee?" I stared at her, stunned by the complete transformation. "You can't be serious. I have documentation showing your authorization on every single transaction," she continued, pulling out her own folder with a satisfied smirk. "Your signature, your employee access codes, your approval stamps. You're the one who signed off on everything, remember? You're the one who covered up all my supposed mistakes." The trap was perfect. Every piece of evidence that proved her guilt also made me look like either a co-conspirator or the actual thief. My loyalty and trust had been turned into weapons against me. "Besides," she added, standing and smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance, "Dad's been talking about retirement. He needs to know the company will be in capable hands. Your wild accusations would just prove you're trying to undermine the family transition." She walked toward the door, then paused to deliver her final blow. "I'm sure you'll make the smart choice, David. You always have been the practical type." As the door closed behind her, I sat alone, surrounded by evidence that could destroy both of us. She played the game perfectly, using my own integrity as the foundation for her scheme. But as I stared at the documents, something nagged at the back of my mind. Rebecca was smart, but she'd been overconfident. And overconfident people make mistakes. I gathered the papers slowly, my mind already working through possibilities she might not have considered. The game wasn't over yet. That evening, I sat in my home office with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, studying every document Rebecca had given me during our months of supposed mentorship. She'd been thorough, but her arrogance had made her sloppy in ways she didn't realize. Digital signatures carry more information than just names. They include timestamps, IP addresses, and metadata that tell the real story of when and where documents were created. I called Marcus Webb, our head of information technology, and scheduled a meeting under the pretense of a routine security audit. Marcus was the kind of detail-oriented person who kept comprehensive logs of every system access, and he was always happy to show off his meticulous record-keeping. These authorization patterns are interesting, Marcus said Tuesday afternoon, pulling up screens of data in his cluttered office. Someone's been accessing the financial system during off hours, making changes to contracts after they've been finalized and approved. That's definitely against company policy. I nodded, taking careful notes. Any way to trace exactly who was making those changes? Every keystroke gets logged, Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. User identification, terminal location, mouse clicks, even the time spent on each screen. Whoever did this left a complete digital fingerprint. The evidence was overwhelming. While Rebecca had been careful to use my authorization codes, she'd forgotten that every action was tied to her specific computer terminal. The timestamps showed her making changes during meetings when I was verifiably with clients or in other parts of the building. Her MBA program apparently hadn't covered digital forensics, but I needed more than just technical evidence. I spent the next 3 days quietly reaching out to people Rebecca had interacted with during her time at the company. Sarah Chun in accounting mentioned strange requests for financial reports that seemed oddly specific. Mike Rodriguez in procurement talked about rush orders that bypassed normal approval processes. Each conversation added another piece to a puzzle that painted a picture of systematic manipulation. The breakthrough came when I discovered Rebecca's personal bank account information through a supplier payment she'd mistakenly processed to herself instead of a vendor. The account showed deposits that perfectly matched the discrepancies in our contracts, creating an undeniable money trail that even her father's love couldn't explain away. Friday afternoon, I made the call that would determine everything. Richard's personal assistant put me through immediately, and I requested a private meeting for Monday morning. Just the two of us, no agenda, marked confidential in his calendar. Richard deserved to hear the truth from someone who respected him enough to let him decide how to handle it. That weekend, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Hope you're having a relaxing weekend, David. Looking forward to continuing our productive partnership next week. The message was clearly meant to remind me of the power she thought she held over me. But power built on lies crumbles fast when the truth comes out, and I'd build a case that would expose every aspect of her deception. I spent Sunday evening organizing my evidence into a clear, logical presentation. Bank records, digital logs, witness statements, and timeline analysis that showed the systematic nature of her theft. More importantly, I documented how she'd manipulated my emotions and exploited my loyalty to Richard to accomplish her goals. As I prepared for Monday's conversation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal vindication. This wasn't just about exposing Rebecca's crimes. It was about protecting the company Richard had spent his life building and the employees who depended on Hartwell Industries for their livelihoods. Rebecca had taught me an important lesson about trust and verification. She'd also underestimated the determination of someone who'd spent 12 years learning every aspect of the business she thought she could easily manipulate. Her biggest mistake wasn't the digital trail she'd left behind. It was assuming that loyalty meant stupidity and that kindness meant weakness. Monday morning would reveal which one of us had truly understood the game we'd been playing. Monday morning hit like a thunderbolt when I walked into Richard's office to find Rebecca already there, sitting across from her father's desk with a manila folder in her lap and an expression that made my blood run cold. She'd beaten me to the punch, and a satisfied smirk on her face told me she'd already started spinning her version of events. David, perfect timing, Richard said, his voice strained and confused. Rebecca just told me something very disturbing about irregularities in the operations budget. She says you've been manipulating financial records for months. I set my own evidence folder on Richard's desk, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. That's interesting because I came here to discuss the exact same thing. Rebecca's confidence faltered for just a moment before she recovered. Dad, I've been investigating suspicious transactions in David's department. He's been approving unauthorized discounts and payments. then covering them up with false documentation. "Show him the Henderson contract," I said quietly, opening my folder and sliding the real contract across the desk. The one where Rebecca claimed she made a 15% discount mistake, but the actual contract shows only 5%. Richard picked up the document, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he read. The confusion on his face deepened as he compared it to Rebecca's version. "This doesn't match what you showed me, Rebecca," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "David must have altered it," she replied quickly, but I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. "He has access to all the financial systems." I pulled out Marcus Webb's digital forensics report, complete with timestamps and IP addresses. Every transaction Rebecca asked me to cover has been traced back to her computer terminal. The metadata shows she was making changes to contracts during meetings when I was verifiably with clients or in other parts of the building. Richard studied the technical report, his face growing paler with each page. As the founder of a manufacturing company, he understood systems and processes better than most. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "There's more," I continued, producing bank statements that showed deposits matching the exact amounts of the contract discrepancies. These payments went directly to an account in Rebecca's name. The room fell silent, except for the sound of papers rustling as Richard reviewed each piece of evidence. Rebecca sat frozen in her chair, her carefully constructed lies crumbling around her. $400,000, Richard finally said, his voice hollow. "You stole $400,000 from the company I spent my life building." "Dad, you have to understand," Rebecca began, tears now flowing freely. "I was under so much pressure to prove myself. The MBA program was expensive, and I had debts he didn't know about. I was going to pay it all back once I took over operations." "By stealing more?" I asked, unable to keep the disgust out of my voice. Richard stood and walked to the window overlooking the production floor where his employees were starting their Monday shift. These were people who'd worked for him for decades, families who depended on the company's success for their livelihoods. "You used David's loyalty against him," Richard said without turning around. "You manipulated his respect for our family to cover your crimes." "I made mistakes," Rebecca admitted, "but David should have questioned my requests instead of blindly following them." "No," Richard said sharply, finally turning to face his daughter. "David did what any decent person would do. He tried to help someone he thought was in trouble. You're the one who turned his kindness into a weapon." The intercom on Richard's desk buzzed. "Mr. Hartwell," his assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "There are two gentlemen here from the state attorney's office. They say they have an appointment." Rebecca's face went white. "Dad, you didn't—" "I called them Saturday afternoon," Richard said quietly. "After David requested this meeting, I had Marcus run a complete audit of our financial systems. The evidence was too clear to ignore." "But I'm your daughter," Rebecca pleaded, standing and reaching toward him. Richard stepped back, his expression hardening. "My daughter wouldn't have stolen from the people who trusted her. My daughter wouldn't have manipulated a good man's loyalty to cover her crimes. I don't know who you are, but you're not the person I raised." The office door opened, and two investigators entered with briefcases and badges. Rebecca looked around the room desperately, but there was nowhere left to run and no more lies that could save her. "Ms. Hartwell," the lead investigator said, "we need you to come with us for questioning regarding allegations of embezzlement and fraud." As they led Rebecca away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time. "This will destroy the company's reputation, Dad. Is that really what you want?" Richard watched his daughter disappear through the doorway, his shoulders sagging under the weight of betrayal and disappointment. "What destroys a company's reputation," he said to the empty room, "is letting thieves run it." 8 months later, I stood in the same conference room where Rebecca had first threatened me, but now it buzzed with excitement as department heads received news of the company's best quarterly performance in 5 years. The money Rebecca stole had been recovered through asset seizure and restitution payments, allowing us to restore employee bonuses and fund long overdue equipment upgrades. Richard had aged visibly during the legal proceedings, but there was a new strength in his leadership. He'd chosen to testify against Rebecca during her trial, a decision that cost him his relationship with his only child but saved the jobs of over 200 employees. "David," he said, approaching me after the meeting ended, "walk with me." We strolled through the factory floor, past machines humming with productive energy and workers who'd regained their faith in the company's integrity. The atmosphere felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. The board made their decision about the succession plan, Richard said as we reached his office. "They want you to take over as chief executive officer when I retire next year." I stopped walking, stunned by the announcement. "Richard, I'm honored, but I never expected—" "You proved something during this crisis that can't be taught in business school," he interrupted. "You showed integrity under pressure, loyalty without blindness, and the courage to do what's right even when it was difficult." He handed me an envelope containing the formal offer, a promotion that represented not just financial advancement, but recognition of values that seemed increasingly rare in corporate America. "Rebecca called me yesterday," Richard said quietly. "From prison. She wanted to know if the company survived the scandal." "What did you tell her?" "That we're stronger than ever. That honest people don't need to fear the truth. And that trust, once properly placed, can move mountains." I thought about Rebecca's final threat during her arrest, that exposing her crimes would destroy the company's reputation. Instead, our transparent handling of the situation had earned respect from clients and employees alike. Several major contracts had been renewed specifically because our clients appreciated our commitment to ethical business practices. "You know what the irony is?" Richard continued. "Rebecca always complained that I never gave her real responsibility. But the first time I trusted her with something important, she chose to steal from the very people she was supposed to lead." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hope you're happy, David. You destroyed my life." I showed the message to Richard, who shook his head sadly. "She still doesn't understand. She destroyed her own life the moment she decided that loyalty was something to exploit rather than earn." I deleted the message without responding. Some people learn from their mistakes and become better. Others learn only how to blame everyone else for the consequences of their choices. I'd learned which type of person I wanted to be, and more importantly, which type of people I wanted to surround myself with. "There's something else," Richard said, pulling out a framed photo from his desk drawer. It showed the three of us at last year's company picnic, him, Rebecca, and me, all smiling and looking like the perfect corporate family. I kept this on my desk for months after everything happened, trying to figure out what I missed. And what did you conclude? That the signs were always there. The way she talked about employees as resources instead of people. How she measured success only in dollars instead of relationships. The impatience she showed when I talked about company values and long-term thinking. He tossed the photo into the wastebasket. Building a company isn't just about profit margins and growth strategies. It's about creating something worthy of people's trust and dedication. Rebecca never understood that. As we watched the afternoon shift change through his office window, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began. The company would survive and thrive, not because we'd eliminated a threat, but because we'd chosen to uphold the principles that made it worth preserving in the first place. "You saved more than just money," Richard said. "You saved the soul of this company." Some battles are worth fighting, not for personal victory, but for the chance to protect what truly matters. In the end, integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when it's easy. It's about having the courage to do what's right when everything you value hangs in the balance.